Welcome to Round the Empire. I'm your host, Joanne Leon. Mohamed Elmaazi is here to continue our discussion on the Assange Extradition hearings. This is a fully independent podcast. Lend your support at patreon.com/aroundtheempire or paypal.me/aroundtheempirepod. Also, please like, share, and subscribe on YouTube. In this episode, we talk about the Assange extradition hearings, what transpired in weeks 3 and 4, and what procedures lie ahead in the process. Mohamed Elmaazi has been providing continuous coverage of these hearings, both last year and this year, from the press annex of the different court facilities or nearby facilities via video link, when in-person coverage wasn't possible. Mohamed Elmaazi is a journalist with experience in human rights law, with degrees from American University in Cairo and the SOAS. He works for Sputnik News, he publishes the Interregnum blog, and he's been a contributor to Open Democracy, the Canary, the Grayzone, and the Real News Network. We recorded this on October 9th, 2020. Mohamed Elmaazi is here, speaking to us from London. Hello, Mo. Thanks so much for coming back on the show to talk to us about week 3 and 4 of the Assange phase 2 of the extradition hearing.
Thank you for having me.
So Mohamed's been reporting on this. This is, if by chance you didn't catch the first interview we did that after week 1, when the second phase of the Assange extradition began at the Old Bailey. He's been reporting from there every day. Well, if you would, do what you did last time, Mohamed, and sort of take us there with you, be our eyes and ears. Tell us what it was like reporting on this trial in the last 2 weeks, because it did change a little bit for you, right?
That's correct. So for most of the time while I was there, I had rented a lounge, if you like, a business lounge, about 10 minutes away from the court. And I was one of the journalists who was granted video access to the hearings. But in the final 3 days, so that's in the 4th week, I was able to get into the actual court building and sit in the press annex, which is the courtroom right next to the court where Julian Assange was and where the lawyers were. And we're also watching the same video link in the press annex. But that did make some things a bit easier because you're inside the court. It's easier to get a read from the various lawyers about things that are happening, even if it's off the record. And it's easier to then check and confirm things with people who are also sitting in the press annex. But it was nearly 4 complete weeks of largely, although not entirely, defense witnesses, because the burden in extradition cases, at least in terms of the Anglo-American extradition treaty, the burden is on the defense to establish why they shouldn't be extradited, because there is a presumption in favor of extradition if the US is requesting somebody from the United Kingdom. And so the vast majority of the witnesses being called were defense witnesses, although there were a couple prosecution witnesses called as well.
Interesting. Just curious, the reason why you were able to get into the actual press annex in the court building, was that because, I mean, I heard some people, I think maybe you did, I know Kevin did, said that the mainstream media, they get the prime seats, they get priority seats, but then over time, they just, they drift off. They don't really stay for the whole trial. Is that what happened? Is that why more people got in?
On a certain level, yes. I mean, there was somebody in there who wasn't from the mainstream media, Mr. Dolman from Byline News, or the Byline Times, rather. But yeah, there was somebody there from BBC. There was somebody there from Press Association. I understand there might have been somebody there from Reuters. So when the tickets, we still don't know the basis upon which certain people or certain outlets were given what few tickets there were to sit inside of court rather than everybody else to view via a video link. And when I say everybody else, it's only certain people as well who were allowed to view via video link. And many of them I could see were from establishment outlets like Le Monde or the Sydney Morning Herald. But I knew what happened in February when part one of the substantive hearings occurred would repeat itself this time round with part two of the substantive hearings, in that there'd be loads of people wanting seats, they'd come in, and then they would start to drift off after a while. For all I know, I could have accessed it had I tried sooner, but part of the difficulty was this, it's a technical difficulty. If you want to have access to the video link, you had to sign in between 9 in the morning and 9:40 in the morning. So you had 40 minutes. So if I was concerned that if I queued up outside of court and I didn't get in because someone says you're not on the list, then I would lose that time frame because I wouldn't have enough time to then get to the office, which I
Right.
was renting 10 minutes away. And so then I'd lose both possibility of court access inside the court and from outside the court. And I was able to make it work, viewing it via video link from around the corner, 10 minutes around the corner. It wasn't the end of the world. So I wanted to, I was concerned about sacrificing good enough for what I thought might be, a slightly more advantageous position. As things progressed towards the final week, and I decided I wanted to try it out because I thought, well, I've covered, the vast majority of the hearing and published an article practically every single day. I think there's only one day where it was mostly a Twitter thread which had, video statements in it, and I thought the Twitter thread was enough, and I was too exhausted to publish an article that particular day. I basically got up extra early, and then so I went to court. There was no queue. There was nobody there even with a list, and so I just got in.
Hmm.
I just, because quite frankly, and this was part of the issue that even one of the court clerks told me. They said, well, this is a public building. You have a press card. You're allowed to enter the building. So, but just because of just convoluted nature of how things are organized in this country, all that's happened is the Ministry of Justice or somebody from the Ministry of Justice or some branch of one of the courts will say, here's a list of people who've been granted access, right, to the press annex. And instead of them simply having somebody outside of the press annex on the third floor, which maybe they just don't have the resources for that, they have somebody outside the court, right, with a list. So I remember having an argument on the second day when I was told, or it might have been later on that day when I was told I did get on the list actually. So what happened was I came in, there was nobody with any list. They waved me through. You go through security, and then that's it. And I just went in and I went to the third floor and just walked into the press annex and sat down. And there were enough seats. There was more than enough seats, and there wasn't an issue about social distancing because there were, it's a courtroom. There was more than enough space. And then I wanted to make sure that I could continue to come in there. So I spoke to one person, that Tariq Haddad, a fellow journalist. He gave me somebody's number, and I spoke to another court clerk who knows me because I've been covering the Assange hearings for 18 months. So when the judge, he's essentially the clerk for that judge, or he works with her. So when Judge Vanessa Breitzer moved to the Old Bailey, because it's a temporary move just for the venue, the clerk came with her. The court officer came with her. So when I said to him, I said, could you get my name on the list? He's like, yeah, of course. Which is hilarious considering how the difficulty people had trying to get on the list to begin with. He's like, yeah, of course, no, of course you should be able to come in. You've been coming to every hearing, right? So later in the day, it was either later in the day or the next day, I can't recall. I queue up thinking, okay, now I'm on the list. I've been told by two separate people I'm on the list. And there was someone this time around, there was someone outside court with a list of names. And they said, where are you going? I said, the Assange hearing. And then she's like, you're not on the list. And I said, I'm definitely on the list because I've been told by two different people I'm on the list. And she's like, okay, wait to the side. So that means other people are getting into court. So now I'm getting nervous. Am I going to lose access, video link access? And I kind of lost my temper, not too much, but I kind of said what was told to me. I said, look, this is a public building. Like, forget about the Assange hearings. There's loads of courts here. If I want to come into the court, I'm allowed to. Look, you see my press card. Right, this list it only relates to people having access to the press annex. Anyway, long story short, another court officer, security officer, happened to be walking by, and she said, "That's the old list," right, to her fellow security person. And then she said, "I printed it out this morning." She said, "Yeah, but that's the old list. I've seen his name on the new lists," and that's how I was able to continue getting in till the end. But literally, that's what it's like. It's not
Yeah.
deliberate. I know there's lots of people who think it's deliberate sabotage. If you live in this country long enough, you understand that is kind of how things sort of like bimble through. You can see that in our COVID response. I'm not saying it was always like this. Maybe 50 years ago it wasn't. I understand Britain's bureaucracy was famous around the world for being quite efficient, but not everything lasts forever. And quite frankly, this is you get kind of used to how somewhat, I don't want to say incompetently, let's just say poorly,
It's
things are
not well oiled. The
organized.
machine is
It's
not as
not,
well oiled.
it's a broken down machine. And I would say, that hacksaw that Margaret Thatcher's government took to the civil service, along with all kinds of outsourcing and privatization of security, including as it relates to Ministry of Justice services, all play a part in this. God knows how many different companies and organizations and public-private partnerships there are in terms of implementing even something like court services. Whereas there used to not be. It used to be all public, as it were. But
Yeah.
anyway, that's the sort of background.
Did you see any of the lawyers in person or see Julian Assange in person, or did they use like a whole separate entrance and avoid the public and the
Nope.
reporters?
No, there is no whole separate entrance. There is for the defendants, yes. So I never saw Julian Assange in person, like face to face, only via the video link during the one time at each hearing when they would move the camera to the left, where he's held in the dock or in the glass sort of box, and then it would move back. I've used to see the lawyers regularly. Sometimes we'd end up at the same cafe during the lunchtime period, and sometimes I'd get off the record sort of views as to how things were going or what to expect next. So, and that increased in my case when I was based in the press annex. Like I said, that's one of the advantages because you're all there physically closer. But I used to see the lawyers on the regular. Everybody queues up the same way. There's no special entrance for members of the public or for the legal team, or the members of the public who wanted to view via the few members of the public who could get in, like the one NGO monitor and a few members of the public. They have to queue via side entrance, which is outside, and they have to wait there until they're let in. So it's actually far less convenient in this court building. And I would have thought, given the size of the building, the nature of the cases that they deal with, very serious cases, and how old it is, you would have thought that they that I don't know, members of the public would just have to wait out in the freezing cold, and then during lunch breaks when they leave, they still have to queue up there because they're told if you leave, even for a bathroom break, and somebody else comes, they'll get your spot,
Oh my gosh.
which is quite
Yeah,
luckily.
it is.
And they're not allowed to take, they can't take any, computers or phones or anything, and they don't store it there. So you've got to find someone to give your belongings to. They were given, you can write on a notepad, but at one point, I think they were told they're not supposed to write at one point, but then I think that was rescinded. That didn't become an issue. They're not even allowed to take water, right? And they could see us just below them because they're above us, one floor above us in the press annex. They could see just below us with like coffee and water. I didn't even realize that till they told me outside. They're like, we're just staring at you, envious, as you're
Um,
drinking your coffee and your water. And unfortunately, there's
yeah.
no way for me to send any up to them. So it's an interesting setup, which I would say leaves much to be desired. But it's not just for this case, for people to understand. So
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, that's terrible, actually. And then Julian, they would take him back to Belmarsh after every session, and in the white van and all that.
at the end of every day, yeah. So at the end of every day, he goes back. So it's wakes up 5 in the morning to go through the whole process to be driven over to the Old Bailey, and then eventually goes back, and then the process was repeated the next day.
The
And
Belmarsh is pretty far, right?
yeah, it's relatively far away. You could imagine like
Like an hour, maybe.
or even more, because
Oh,
it's if there's traffic and all the rest of it, yeah.
yeah. All right. Well, thanks for that. I always like the eyes and ears kind of thing. If we are lucky enough to have someone to talk to who was actually there, I love to hear the details of kind of how it really was and what you saw. So thanks for that. So let's talk about the 3 weeks 3 and 4. There were some. I was following your reporting, and just so people know, if you didn't know already, I'll link um, Mohammed's articles. You can always just go to the archive. Everything that he has written is at one link, but I'll put the specific links there. Also, his Twitter feed in real time. You can see, and he organized it really well. So that's another way to follow this. But anyway, let's start around September 21st. Let's talk about the things that you found to be most significant and interesting during those 2 weeks.
So, third week began with testimony that was read out in part in court because the prosecution decided that they didn't want to cross-examine the witness. And essentially that came from a US-based journalist, Cassandra Fairbanks, who publishes with, among other places, the Gateway Pundit, which is generally regarded as a right-wing pro-Trump outlet. And Cassandra Fairbanks was considered to be a sort of supportive of Trump, at least in certain respects. I can't go into detail about that. People could judge for themselves based on her articles. But she knew Julian Assange, and she's visited him when he was in the embassy. And essentially, briefly, I mean, she was part of a Telegram, I think a Telegram group or WhatsApp chat, which was with other people who were associated with the Republican Party, including Richard Grenell, who was then the U.S. ambassador to Germany, and Arthur Schwartz, who's a wealthy GOP donor who also did communications for Richard Grenell, and was apparently is an informal advisor to Donald Trump Jr. He's been described as Donald Trump Jr.'s fixer, fairly or unfairly. That's how he's been described. And she dropped a link in a chat there, which was a link to an interview with Julian Assange's mother, on the hopes that it would sort of generate some sympathy and possibly someone might act. And this resulted, she says, in a phone call from Arthur Schwartz, who was quite cross with her, was saying that, we could have forgiven basically your sympathy for Assange and WikiLeaks before on the basis that you were ignorant as to what they're responsible for, but now there's no excuse, and you have to stop this. And it led to her ultimately recording, because of the nature of the calls, recording future conversations. And one of the things that Arthur Schwartz had said to her, basically he predicted various things that ended up coming to pass, right? Which was why she ended up recording the conversations. So things such as he's going to be taken out of the embassy, and the fact that he's going to be charged, but he won't be charged for anything post sort of 2010-11. And during one sort of panicky phone call, when he called her up very angry. Oh, right, that's it. One of the things he'd mentioned that the focus would be the Manning case, and that it wouldn't involve anything, for example, in relation to the Vault 7 publications or anything to do with the DNC.
Interrupt for 1 second. The reason he was angry was because, and I saw this happen in real time, she got on Periscope and revealed this information. Maybe you just said this and I missed it.
No.
But she revealed this information to the public because she is she's an advocate. She has been acting like an advocate for Julian Assange, and so that's why this group got really upset with her.
Well, he was quite angry even after she just dropped that link to the interview with Julian Assange's mother.
Okay. Right? Forgive me.
So he's been angry on multiple occasions and multiple phone calls with her. And so the first time this is initiated is when he called up. So it says in the statement, Mr. Schwartz repeatedly insisted that I stop advocating for WikiLeaks and Assange, telling me that, quote, a pardon isn't going to fucking happen, end quote. He knew very specific details about a future prosecution against Assange that were later made public, and that only those very close to the situation then would have been aware of. He told me that it would be the Manning case that he would be charged with, and that it would not involve Vault 7 publication or anything to do with the DNC. He also told me that they'd be going after Chelsea Manning. I also recollect being told, I believe, that it would not be before Christmas. Both of these predictions came true just months later. That's from her statement that was read into court.
Okay, gotcha.
And at one point, she says to him, kidnapping a political refugee from the Ecuadorian embassy would be an act of war, to which Mr. Schwartz responded, not if they let us. Right? So, and with these things ultimately coming to pass, she ultimately decided to start recording subsequent conversations. And at one point, she had tweeted out an article from ABC News, which essentially described parts of the role that Richard Grenell was involved in sort of making the deal with the Ecuadorians to get Assange out of the Ecuadorian embassy. And she gets a very panicky, angry call from Mr. Schwartz saying, you're going to get me into trouble. You're tweeting out classified information. I don't want to go to prison, things like that. And she's like, well, all I've done is just tweeted out this ABC article. Like, I know what you've done. Please delete it, etc. So I think she figured out, or she came to believe that his concern was that people would still link up her past publications, because she ended up writing about, and like you said, she did a Periscope video about what had happened, right, and about the call, etc. So
Yeah,
I think
sure. She
he
started
was
going over to London to, live stream outside the
and
embassy and things too,
and
and subsequent.
it was known that they knew each other, right? So it would be like, oh, it wouldn't be too difficult for people to figure out that Schwartz was the source of information, that
Okay,
she
I
would,
got you.
you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So that was just another thing that was just making her nervous. And during this call, one of the recorded calls, basically, when he called up panicking about the ABC article, telling her to delete it, he essentially says that this was done on that removing Assange was done on direct orders from the U.S. president, right? So it's, is it a problem? Like, why should we get into trouble? I don't want to go to prison, right? This is should I go to prison? You're going to punish me because he took orders from the president, he says during the recorded conversation, right? So it's quite significant, and that assists the defense who in a number of ways. The defense are arguing that this is a politically motivated prosecution, which is separate from the argument that they're also making that this is a political offense, which they say is an exception under the extradition treaty. In fact, in the extradition treaty, you can't extradite for something that's a political offense, but that's a separate series of legal arguments as to why espionage are pure political offense. And of course, the prosecution is arguing it's not an exception, and even if it were, espionage isn't a pure political offense, right? So that's a separate legal argument. But they're also arguing abuse of process, which has many prongs to it, one of which is there's been testimony also in courts that the Department of Justice ultimately came to the conclusion that they couldn't bring an indictment against Julian Assange without also opening the door to prosecutions against the New York Times and other such outlets, something which was known internally at the DOJ as the New York Times problem.
Right.
And so there was a fair amount of evidence that was put forward that this was the case. Of course, the prosecution challenged that was the case, but ultimately it seemed rather accepted that they came to that conclusion. There was a decision, in some cases, some people said a decision not to prosecute. In other cases, a decision, at least the wording became a bit weird, but a decision not to prosecute that could have been reversed. I mean, everyone agreed that, this is open to change. But normally, if you have an internal legal decision like that with a serious legal foundation, First Amendment, the New York Times problem, freedom of speech, freedom of press, then something needs to change significantly for that to be revised. And effectively, the defense's argument is the only thing that changed was a change in government. And so therefore, this is abuse of process because this shows how there's political interference in what would otherwise be a relatively neutral criminal justice matter of prosecutors deciding whether or not a prosecution should go ahead. And this assists that argument because it It's it's saying here's somebody who is in a position to know, right, because of his position as communications for Richard Grenell, who is very close to the president, who helped to organize and orchestrate Assange's removal from the embassy, somebody who had advanced knowledge that that was going to happen, which ultimately manifested itself. This person is saying it came from direct orders of the president. And the prosecution didn't argue that those conversations happened. The position was merely that we don't accept necessarily the veracity of the remarks, although we're not contesting the witness statement. And whenever the prosecution didn't contest a statement, even if that means they don't accept necessarily the truthfulness of everything in the statement, but they're not going to contest it, it means there's no cross-examination. So if there's no cross-examination, then the judge says, okay, well, that means there's no point on the witness to testify. And that means that only a summary or the gist of their statement would be read into court by the defense, which is what would end up happening whenever the prosecution and the defense could agree to a witness statement. And of course, that means there's lots of pressure to agree. But it also means that there are times where the prosecution really don't want to cross-examine, because that will increase, if you like, the public awareness of certain aspects of certain things that the defense are putting forward. This is quite an explosive aspect of the argument, right? It furthers the defense's position of political involvement or political interference in prosecution. And I think that's another key reason why the prosecution wanted to not contest the statement, even if they didn't accept the veracity of the statement.
Yeah,
if that makes
for
sense.
Sure. No, it does. And I mean, I think it should be noted that these kinds of conversations and deliberations in the president's inner circle, if you will, these generally never get out in the public, or maybe they get out, via some anonymous source or whatever, but not with the. I mean, there's still some hearsay involved in all of this, but yeah, it's pretty astonishing, and it's even more complicated than this when you get into the different ways that the Trump sort of friends or colleagues sort of got involved in this case. Not enough time to get into that now, but it is pretty tangled. But just the nature of the insider chat information that gets into a political case is it's pretty astonishing, actually.
Absolutely.
So that was the Cassandra Fairbanks testimony, and she didn't have to be cross-examined. What else did we have in these last 2 weeks that was particularly notable?
So the next 4 days were all focused on medical testimony, something that I understand was quite difficult for Stella. I'm sure Stella Morris, the partner of Julian Assange and mother of his 2 children, but as well as Julian Assange himself, as it would be for anybody to hear various, in public, to hear psychiatrists and psychotherapists discuss sort of your mental state, your emotional state, be examined on that by the defense, be cross-examined on that by the prosecution, for newspaper articles to be published about that. And so for the next 4 days, that focused on whether or not, one neuropsychiatrist testified that he believed Julian Assange is at, quote, very high risk of suicide, end quote, should extradition occur. Another expert testified, an expert in autism, testified that he believes Julian Assange is on the quote-unquote high-functioning end of the autism spectrum. And this was significant because his depression, which is currently diagnosed as being mild, but mild in a clinical sense, not mild as in like, oh, I'm a bit moody today, for people to understand. Depression has a clinical definition, because it was previously diagnosed as being severe, in fact. During a time period, during the time period key when he was taken from the Ecuadorian embassy to the prison, to Belmarsh prison. And the significance as well of the diagnosis of being on the autism spectrum is a sort of the obsessive nature with which people on the autism spectrum can engage in certain acts. So the question as well is, do you think does this increase the likelihood of not only suicide attempts but successful suicide action? And the argument was yes. So the final question that was put by the prosecution when crossing the doctor, whether or not he still thought Julian Assange was at high risk after the prosecution tried to poke various holes in the assessment. And this is, should he be extradited? And is basically it was asked, and this is Dr. Dealey who was being cross-examined. Is your assessment essentially that Mr. Assange was at high risk of suicide merely in comparison to the general public? And the doctor stressed that in his judgment, quote, any responsible clinician caring for Mr. Assange under present circumstances would ensure that risk of suicide was actively managed should a determination be made to extradite him. And that was his response to the final question. And this stuff went on for hours, not only hours, but for days. Prosecution experts, and all of these people are eminent in their field, right? A prosecution expert was called, who had also examined Assange, who said that he believed Julian Assange is a resilient man who isn't at risk of suicide if extradited, right? So that was one of the few times where a prosecution expert was called. And a separate one who concurred, but he didn't concur completely, and the defense got him to agree that if Julian Assange faced a life sentence or an effective life sentence, that there would be an increased risk of suicide, and he did agree with that based on his assessment of Julian Assange. So then that is now taking us into the third and final week, where there was all manner of examination of what prison conditions would be like in the United States, and as well as pre-trial detention.
Yeah.
Where he would be detained, what it would be like, whether or not he would have interaction with other prisoners. Most of the testimony is that he would not. He would likely be under special administrative measures.
Which is just a pretty name for solitary confinement, really.
But more so because you can be in solitary confinement without SAMs. SAMs are for people in terrorism or national security cases where the Attorney General, upon advice from members of the Ministry of Justice, not Ministry of Justice in the United States, the Department of Justice, as well as the intelligence community, argue that this person has access to information in their head, essentially, that they may discuss with other prisoners. So that means that first they discuss what it would be like without SAMs, right, which sounded pretty awful, quite frankly. And then what it would be like with SAMs, and whether or not that would continue should he be convicted post-trial, and where he would go, where he would likely end up post-trial. So there was lots of discussion of that environment. And here's one headline of mine: Assange faces conditions, quote, essentially the same as solitary confinement, end quote, in the U.S. should he be extradited, as according to one. Another one is a prison warden, a former prison warden of the facility that Julian Assange would expect to be detained.
In Alexandria or the one in Colorado?
Oh, sorry. No, she wasn't actually a prison warden in Alexandria. She was a prison warden at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York City. But the reason she was called is because she had lots of experience of dealing with people under SAMs, right? So that's why she was called. So A, to discuss what it was like, and B, what SAMs were like. And when she was being cross-examined, because this is somebody who was a prison warden for 7 years and had been with the Bureau of Prisons in the United States for years before that, and now she's a defense witness, right? And she was asked by the prosecution, who kept challenging her on this, did you ever try to challenge these conditions that you described that sound quite bad? And she said, no. Did you ever try to get your staff to converse with and speak with the prisoners in this isolation unit, which you say they essentially had no contact with anybody? If you say you're concerned, you were not, about their conditions. She said no, and because that's not for me, that's not their job description. Like if I start telling people that whose job is basically to go in there, open up the flap, peer in, and then close the flap, peer in to see that they're still alive, essentially, and then close the flap of the gate of the
the door thing,
the door to their room, the steel door to their cell, and then walk off. I tell them, no, now you've got to start speaking to them. That's not within my jurisdiction to tell them to do that. And then the cross-examiner, Claire Dubbin, in this case, the barrister, was saying, come now, surely if you were genuinely concerned, you would have told them to do this. She says, look, these people are members of a union. If I start telling them to do this, to start like engaging in chit chat with the prisoners, or I'd be told that this isn't within your scope. We're not meant to do this.
So they were discrediting
I
her
was,
whole testimony by saying because she didn't do anything about it, it's not valid that she was concerned about it, something like that.
yeah, and as well, did you discuss this with anybody higher up in the Bureau of Prisons? You're concerned, and she said, no, I hadn't. Had you discussed this with any judge? She says, no, I hadn't. And then it was put to her essentially, um, to Miss Baird, that's her name. Miss Dubbin puts it to Miss Baird that the conditions of SAMS didn't cause her, quote, that much concern at the time, and stressed and argued that it was only now that Miss Baird is testifying for the defense that she's concerned about the regime. And she replied, quote, they did cause me concern, but I had convinced myself that they were okay, end quote. And I didn't see anybody else note that. And I thought that was quite significant because it shows how people are in institutions and all kinds of organizations. You don't feel it's your place. You don't want to rock the boat. You're concerned. You have issues. She said that she tried to speak with prisoners when she had the opportunity to sort of lead by example. But, and now she's apparently a prison reform advocate, right? Which is probably how the defense found out about her.
Yeah, and I mean, there's something called retrospect too. And it's an issue. Solitary confinement has only become a big issue in this country in the last 10 or so years. Now it's in the media all the time and there's activism against it. Maybe there wasn't. I mean, I can understand her position, but I can see how it could be used to discredit her as well.
Yeah, but she was quite strong. I thought she was quite strong. I know members of the legal team were quite strong. She didn't lose her temper. She stood firm. She didn't sound like she was trying to embellish. She was just describing. I thought that was quite an admission that I had convinced myself that they were okay, and that was effectively, one of the final responses, because that was, I thought that was powerful. She didn't press it after that, right? Because
I mean,
it came off as genuine.
In their own inner thoughts, I think every bureaucrat can understand that position, I would guess.
And so, but there were two other things that were coming towards the end of the, this in the last week. One that was mentioned a bit earlier in the week of the final week, which was that cracking the password was neither possible nor necessary to access classified documents.
Oh yeah, this is important.
This is important because it relates to the conspiracy charge. So 17 out of the 18 charges on the indictment all come under the Espionage Act. But the one charge, which arguably is what the U.S. is using to assert jurisdiction, because Americans should remind themselves that you have somebody who's not a U.S. citizen, who's never lived in the United States, whose organization, WikiLeaks, is not based out of the United States, and who never took an oath of allegiance to the U.S. government, is being charged with espionage for publishing classified U.S. documents that were leaked to him by a U.S. Army whistleblower, Chelsea, then at the time Bradley Manning. And that would essentially mean that the U.S. government has the right to bring charges against anybody in the world for publishing classified U.S. documents, something which national security reporters do all the time. And
Right.
we had loads of testimony to that effect, by the way, of award-winning investigative journalists who told the court this. These are things that we've done. So this is significant because this is the extraterritorial application of domestic U.S. law. It's also significant that, in the first part of the hearings, and that was in February, when it was mostly legal arguments, not evidentiary arguments with witnesses that happened, in September, in part two, the U.S. government argued that the First Amendment does not apply to foreign journalists, which every single constitutional expert that I've spoken to says is nonsense, right? Because the Bill of Rights doesn't say it only applies to citizens, right?
Right.
I mean, in terms of freedom of speech, at least freedom of press, maybe voting does, right? But in terms of the First Amendment, for example, or the right to due process.
Yeah, it's fuzzy.
But the disturbing thing about that, of course, because that would mean that if you're a foreigner now, you don't have the right to protections under the First Amendment, right? But so what you're saying is the same government then is arguing that the criminal laws apply to you, but First Amendment protections don't. How does that work, right?
Yeah, I think that's
So
the real sticking point. Yeah.
you get the disadvantage of the criminal laws, but because, for example, in Britain, like your rights in terms of speech and assembly don't depend on your citizenship, right? Nor do they in France, nor do they in Germany, and nor do they in the United States historically, right? Unless a court suddenly decides to reverse God knows how many years of jurisprudence and precedent. I mean, that would be quite strange if that were the case. If suddenly,
Well,
because you
yeah.
don't carry a passport,
I
that
think
means
it used
suddenly
to
you don't
be.
have free.
I think it used to be a little more cut and dry. Like if you're here, if you're on U.S. soil, you get those rights. But now with the virtual world, it makes everything a lot more complicated.
Well, but we're talking about whether or not, because First Amendment protections only matter in relation to state prosecution, right? In this case. So if you're not based in the United States, the state is saying we can prosecute
Yeah.
for speech violations, but you
So you're
have no First
subject to our
Amendment
laws,
protection.
but you don't get any of our rights. Yeah.
Exactly, which is perverse. So that's why that's significant. But the one of the key charges, which was the first charge on the first indictment, related to the conspiracy charge, which is they argue that Manning and Assange um, discussed cracking what's known as a password hash during their discussions, during their anonymous discussions. Although it didn't end up anywhere, right? It didn't lead anywhere. Now, first of all, one thing that the defense put forward was that, which the expert witness ultimately had to agree. He was I don't know, spent however many years with the Judge Advocate General's office as a JAG officer in the military. So he's a computer expert and a 20-year investigator in the U.S. military, right? So he examined, I don't know how many hundreds or thousands of pages of the Chelsea Manning court-martial and produced a report for the court. And he gave very strong testimony as well. I quite liked it when people who had a background in military, they gave short answers and to the point, which was sometimes quite a nice change, right? Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it was, on the one hand, they agreed that it was never established whether or not Manning was ever speaking to Julian Assange, or whether or not it was a different person each time. Could have been a number of different people,
Right. These were
right? So
anonymous chat logs with
yeah,
using
there was a
pseudonyms.
name.
Yeah.
There was a pseudonym, but anybody could have been behind the pseudonym. And he said, "Oh, that's correct." And they said, "Well, why did you assume in your report that it was Julian Assange? And why do you say it was Julian Assange?" And he said, "Actually, I just assumed it, but you're correct that we don't know." He was a defense witness, but he did put that in the report. So that was an interesting point. But much more significant than that was they effectively established that Chelsea Manning already had access to all the information she needed that was ultimately leaked to WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, right? In terms of the Iraq war logs and the Afghan war diaries and the Guantanamo Bay detainee files, as well as the diplomatic cables. So there was no need to crack any password. That's number one. Number two, the discussion was whether or not Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning were discussing possibly helping to hide her identity so she couldn't get caught. So, we heard lots of testimony over the weeks that attempting to help a source in government shield their identity is standard journalistic practice if you're doing your job properly, right? Which, of course, the prosecution tried to dispute that there's a line and that the line could be crossed. But the argument was, even if what the prosecution is alleging is true, the line isn't crossed here. And B, the defense was saying that actually all they were discussing, if there was a discussion, right, this discussion was about cracking a password hash that would have permitted Chelsea Manning to access a popular video game website that was blocked to the staff. And evidence was put forward that this was something that was common for people to want to do, was to access, we have video games and music videos and things like that.
Yeah.
Right?
Movies and
So
stuff. Right.
so that's quite significant. And people want to read into the details because it gets a bit technical. They can read that article. If they click the link on my profile on Twitter, then it'll take you to muckrake.com and it will just show all the recent articles I published. Somebody, I don't whom is just publishing their links to all
Oh, I didn't
those
know about
articles.
that either. Good, thanks.
Yeah, I didn't. That's why I just put that in my profile because I found
You've
that
done
quite
some
useful.
interviews too that we might want to link. You've been on
Right.
panels and you've done interviews. Yeah.
I don't. Yeah, I don't know if any panels I've done have ended up here because I don't know who's putting them up there, but somebody's putting them up there. So that was a key piece of information, and then finally we come to the UC Global testimony, which was
Yeah.
not cross-examined, but was statements that were read or summarized to the
And these are
court. And
anonymous witnesses from UC Global who actually worked there and did the work in the embassy, right?
exactly, these are people who worked for a Spanish Ecuadorian security firm that was originally hired by the Ecuadorian embassy to provide protection for the embassy and for Julian Assange when Assange was there, and family members of the former president of Ecuador. Um, but that the CEO, David Morales of UC Global, ultimately ends up coming to an agreement, apparently with the CIA, to instead of providing protection, security protection, to provide surveillance, to surveil the embassy and Julian Assange and all those coming into contact with him and all those coming into contact with those coming into contact with him on behalf of the CIA, to the point that they were bugging rooms. And it's interesting because as you read the statement, you realize that as Julian Assange starts to take precautions because they suspect that they're being bugged, that they're being surveilled, their countermeasures are being requested by the quote unquote American friends, as they're being referred to by David Morales, are being requested. So Julian Assange was using a white noise machine at one point, right? When he's having private conversations, including with his legal team. Then an IT person with UC Global, who's one of the two whistleblowers, is asked to go to the embassy and place these stickers on the windows. And he's told, oh, they just say CCTV in operation. He's like, oh, that's strange. We've never had them before. So he goes and he places them, and he says he's later told by David Morales, the one who's giving him the instructions, that those stickers, what they're doing is they're quelling the vibrations of the windows
Yeah.
because that are being made by the white noise machine, because the Americans are based across the embassy firing a laser mic through the window, and they needed that because the white noise machine was causing vibrations, and the stickers have put an end to that.
So it's going to basically
Uh,
dampen the vibrations in the window to help uh, these devices read vibrations and translate them into voices,
yeah,
back into
yeah, for the
voices.
for the
But they're
yeah, it was a
basically it's
yeah.
just to dampen the vibration. Yeah.
To dampen the vibrations on the windows themselves so that they can get the sound that's coming from inside the embassy itself. Assange starts having his privileged lawyer client conversations in the woman's bathroom. So then the IT person is told that you've got to go and install a microphone in the woman's bathroom. And all of this is recording 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's a live feed. The CCTV cameras, which were inside the embassy, are replaced. CCTV that also has audio. And when the IT person says, well, that's strange because that's not needed for security, we don't need them to have audio, they're told, well, you're not aware of what's in the contract with the Ecuadorian embassy. I'm the only one who's aware. So, the buck stops with me. So just do it, essentially. And also, if anybody asks you, tell them it's not recording audio. And the IT person says, when I was asked by Julian Assange, as well as a member of the government, Ecuadorian government, who comes into the embassy, are these recording audio? I told them no, because that's what I was told to say, right? So it's just, people can get
Yeah.
into they really should look into the kinds of things that are discussed, but this is damning stuff. This is worse practically than what happened with the Ellsberg case, and Daniel Ellsberg himself testified to the court and described why his case fell apart all those years ago when Richard Nixon's administration was prosecuting him under the Espionage Act for being a whistleblower in his case, and he faced 115 years in prison if convicted, and the case fell apart largely because it was discovered the FBI agents had ransacked had broken into his psychiatrist's office to steal privileged medical files so that they could use the information against him, and that came to light. So
Yeah, and
all
so
kinds
that's
of
out
terrible.
there as a precedent. Plus, the one of your articles, you talk about how they were saying that the real target, what they were most interested in this surveillance is, and all of this surveillance included Julian Assange's talks with, strategizing with his lawyers. So they've got all of that, his
They were priority
prosecutors.
targets. That's the quote. The quote is, the lawyers are the priority targets. Yeah.
So they want to find out how he's going to defend himself and, give an unfair, illegal advantage to the prosecution. It just violates everything, right?
Well,
So,
and not just that. I mean, just like imagine everything you're
yeah, I
discussing with your
can't. It's so
prosecutor,
creepy. I
with your
can't
with your
even.
lawyers, right? It's like all the things that are privileged that won't even ever come up in court, that are just background stuff, like all
Yeah, you're
kinds of
going to talk about your
conversations,
biggest vulnerabilities and things like that. Yes.
sources that you need to keep
Right.
protected, all kinds of things. They're listening to everything. This is now going on for a couple of years, and ultimately these two people end up blowing a whistle. One of them was a partner, 50% share in the company, right? So obviously the David Morales, which is important to note that there's an ongoing criminal prosecution now against David Morales in
In
Spain
Spain. Yeah.
because of this. But the witnesses were still granted anonymity protection on the basis that they think that their lives are at risk, and that if they're right now, if something happens to them, it's essentially known, essentially, who will have ordered or the hit, if you like, or some kind of violent attack against them,
Yeah, and
because
it's not
their
going to be
identities.
too hard to figure out who they are
No,
either.
no,
So,
no, not on that basis. The opposite is argued, right? Is that right now the only person who knows for sure who these people are is David Morales and a couple other people in the inner circle.
oh, okay,
If
got it.
their identity becomes public, then whatever incentive there is for David Morales not to order some kind of attack on the witnesses drops, because now the whole world is potentially full of possible assailants. So they're arguing that the reason their identity should remain anonymous is not that because somebody could do some research and find out who they are, um, which is obviously true. I mean, come on, how many people owned a 50% stake with David
Yeah,
Morales in the
yeah, yeah.
company? But you still have to do the research. It's still not publicly known. There's anonymity orders both in Spain and now in the UK. So that's why that was argued by the defense, that those anonymity orders should be
Okay.
maintained. And the prosecution didn't challenge it, which is good. They didn't challenge the argument for an anonymity order. So they signed affidavits that were read out. But it's pretty John le Carre stuff. Like if you put this in a film, um, some people would say this is too on the nose. This is a bit too much. What you're saying is going on. Like, come on. Ultimately, the whistle was blown after there were discussions with David Morales and the American government that were being shared with members of staff, of discussing leaving the door open of the embassy for security, to leave the door open of the embassy so he could be kidnapped out of the embassy, and even for him to be poisoned, either as an assassination or to get him sick so that he'd have to leave the embassy and then be taken from there. And that's when I think that became too much for these people after everything else they'd already been engaging in, and they were like, yeah, no, this is not going to happen, and they ultimately end up blowing the whistle.
Yeah, it's still a
End
huge
up
risk for
leaving
them.
the company.
But
Well,
I,
remember, when they first signed up, they're just providing security for the Ecuadorian embassy. Now, all of a sudden, like they're doing the opposite, right? Like, this
yeah,
is
well,
not what I signed up for, kind of.
yeah, I worked in IT for years. I don't do surveillance work, but yeah, I can sympathize with this position. Yeah,
So
they're no
that's
matter what they do, they're in a bad position. So,
so that was, on one of the final day, the second to last day, essentially. Um,
can you
that's
talk
how.
about one more aspect of that? How does Sheldon Adelson get involved in this? That's part that kind of confused me.
Right. So Sheldon Adelson uh, is a billionaire donor to Donald Trump. He's a casino magnate. According to an interview that I did, because Max Blumenthal wrote a very good article on this, and I interviewed him about it for Sputnik, um, and he publishes in the Grayzone. Sheldon Adelson's main concern essentially is Israel. Right, he's a committed Zionist, and he wants the state of Israel to, be a land for Jews and Jews only. Essentially, the foundational premise of Zionism. Right. So, um, from Max Blumenthal's perspective, he doesn't give a toss one way or another about WikiLeaks or Julian Assange, but he has links to Mike Pompeo, and he's a major contributor to Donald Trump, or at least he was before. My understanding is there's been a falling out now.
Yeah, yeah.
So he's got links. One of his chief security, IT security person, also was formerly with, I think, the FBI or NSA, doing IT security. With just, let's say, with the federal government. I can't remember which branch of the federal government, and somebody who might have also worked in the state of Israel as well. And so it looks essentially as if Shadel Adelson was the cutaway. So what happened is David Morales, with his company UC Global, essentially had one client, and that was the Ecuadorian embassy. Then he goes to a security in Las Vegas, at Las Vegas Sands, which I think is being hosted by Sheldon Adelson. And when he comes back from the security affair, he says, we've shifted to the dark side. That's his quote. We've shifted to the dark side, and the dark side is understood to be U.S. intelligence, right? We're now moving to the big leagues. That was a quote from one of the statements, and the other witness had said the Premier League, right, which is a reference to football, right, the Premier League. Not American football, soccer.
Yeah, soccer. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've moved to the big leagues now, and he got this contract to provide security for one of Adelson's boats in the Mediterranean, and one of the witness statements said, or the affidavit said, we found this strange because Shale Adelson already has like security, and that boat has got like massive security. So it looks as though he was essentially getting paid via Shale Adelson for like a no-show job, as it were. And this is a means by which, he's getting compensated by the CIA, if not directly. Because Shale Adelson not only is a donor for Donald Trump, but has links for Pompeo. Mike Pompeo was head of the CIA at the time. Yeah. His very first speech as head of the CIA was how WikiLeaks is a grave threat. It's a non-state hostile
intelligence,
intelligence, operation, etc. I mean, it was. You should read it. It's foaming at the mouth in terms of what it's arguing, right? And so this is the link. They also said, David Morales also said that as a result of this work, we're going to get contracts from around the world now. Right, the Americans are going to open doors for us everywhere, right? And
so we're in on covert operations business now. Yeah.
Well, and the thing is, this is one way that governments can it's like some people argue plausible deniability. We can argue how plausible the deniability is, but that's just one step removed, where you have you don't even need to be getting a check from the U.S. government. It's just that because of connections with all kinds of businesses, somebody says, hey, let this person get a bit of a action on with Halliburton or whatever. And even if they say, no, we've got our own people, it's like, hey, you've been quadruple billing us for services you haven't even rendered in Iraq. If we tell you to do something, do it. You know what I mean? So assuming even you get any pushback, people can imagine, the United States spends hundreds of billions of dollars on the military and on the Department of Defense. And we can, not necessarily defense, but that's what the department is called. So there's all kinds of contracts there for all kinds of operations all over the place. They don't even need to be high-risk operations. It could be anything. You know what I mean? Providing security for somebody who's not really a high-value target or anything, but just somebody who needs a bit of security. And by the end of it, they were saying that they estimated he was getting 250,000 euros a month in his bank account, which is a lot. It's over $250,000 a month. Imagine that, right? So he's getting paid twice, at least, for services, for providing services for the embassy. Once by the Ecuadorian government for protecting the embassy, and once by the Americans for violating the embassy sovereignty, and the country's sovereignty, and spying Julian Assange. And so that's the sort of Sheldon Adelson nexus, if you like.
I tell you, I mean, so many disturbing things. I don't know how this can go forward, but anything can happen at this point in time in this country, particularly this case. So there were two journalists who were not allowed to testify in person too, but they did take a statement. Was it Patrick Coburn and was it Noam Chomsky?
Well, there's a number of people whose statements were read out. So there's Cassandra Fairbanks, Khalid Al-Masri's statement. Khalid Al-Masri, I think we discussed it last time, did
Yeah,
we?
we
He was
did.
somebody who was kidnapped by the Americans, rendered to various places, tortured, brutalized when they realized they had the wrong person. Actually, well after they realized they had the wrong person, they ultimately just kicked him out of the road. I think in Albania. I mean, he's not Albanian. He has no connection to Albania. They're just literally at
They
night, get
dumped
out of the
him.
van.
Yeah,
Yeah, if
yeah.
you turn around, we'll kill you. Don't tell anybody about what's happened. And then they drive off. And he said, this is when I thought I was going to die, basically. And then he ends up meeting some police at a checkpoint. And they're like, who are you? What are you doing here? And he's somehow has to converse with them. And then eventually he makes his way back to Germany. Poor guy. It's like 4 or 5 months of just being tortured, right? Not
Yeah,
saying
he
if it
was
was
like
the
in a
right
pit in
person, but that would be
Afghanistan.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I'm not saying if it was the right person, it would be okay to torture him. I'm just saying that they
No.
just had the completely wrong person. And you can imagine Khalid al-Masri is actually will be a common name. Al-Masri just means the Egyptian. Like how many? There's like tens
Oh,
of millions of
okay.
people, right? So Masr is just Arabic for Egypt. So al-Masri will be that means that at some point in time in his family line, someone will have been from Egypt because he's German of Lebanese descent. And Egypt's in North Africa, but who knows? Maybe his great 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 grandfather or something. And Khalid is a popular first name. I have family members with that name. I have friends with that name. So it's just, the stupidity and combined with viciousness of this organization. So he wasn't able to testify. He was trying to do it over his mobile phone via video link. And then when it didn't work, the prosecution renewed its objection. And then ultimately the judge bought the objection and they just read from a gist of his statement. So because there was pressure for this to finish within 4 weeks, ultimately a lot of statements ended up being read, or not a lot, but a number of them, and that included Noam Chomsky's, which is very good. People should check out the full statement. It's very well written. He pulled no punches. When it came to his literary writing and his quotes and his statements, far more so than was able to be read into the record. And a few others, yeah, Patrick
Right.
Coburn and a few others weren't able to be. And I think this is largely due to time. The judge is saying, come to agreement more, come to agreement more.
Hmm.
And it's like, well, if somebody's not going to be cross-examined, then you're just going to have to summarize just the statement.
He's also, older man, and it would be high risk to have him testify in person, but I guess,
Yeah, but
it
that
could
wouldn't
be
have
done
been
by
an issue.
video. Yeah.
Yeah, the vast majority of statements were done by video link. Very few witnesses who testified in person.
Oh, okay. So,
Because
it,
we have a problem of 14 as well. So somebody had to come. Cassandra Fairbanks would have. She would have come in person, but she's like, well, I'm going to have to come and then quarantine for 14 days before. So that means 14 days before the hearing. And so it was just, COVID has just made everything just much more convoluted, unfortunately.
yeah, true. So technically the extradition hearings continue now, but there's a time period that of deliberation. Is that what's next, or is there something?
No, the hearings are effectively over. There will be a call over hearing, but that's just every 28 days, Julian Assange needs to be produced in court to show, essentially, I think, to show that he's still alive, right? If he was on bail, perhaps to show that he hasn't fled, but he's in custody. So I think I used to call them proof of life hearings, which is just
Okay.
every 28 days. Are you Julian Assange? Yes. Date of birth? Yes. And then he gets taken back to Belmarsh. And that's assuming it's even not done by video link, it's done in person. So there's going to be more call over hearings. But the extradition hearings themselves are over. There will be in 4 weeks' time, or less than 4 weeks' time, the defense will submit their written submissions, their closing arguments. The prosecution will have 2 weeks thereafter for the prosecution to replace their closing arguments. Then the defense, I think, will have 72 hours after that to present any, I think, further statements that issues that may have been brought up by the prosecution that they need to address, that they feel that they need to address. Since it's the defense's case that they have to bring the case, I think that's why it's a bit different than it might be in other cases. Then the judge will render her judgment, she says, on the 4th of January 2021.
Huh. But
And we'll all end up back in court for that. So I'll end up back in court for that. So 2 weeks. So end of October, 30th of October, defense have to present their closing submissions, but it's just going to be written. They wanted oral, but that won't happen now. Prosecution then 2 weeks into November, so probably after the election, not probably, it's after the US presidential election. The prosecution then will making their final submissions, and then 72 hours defense will have any further submissions thereafter. And then the judge's decision will be 4th of January next
Got
year.
it. Got it. All right. Well, thank you very much for laying that out. I'm very tempted to ask you what you think is going to happen, but that's not fair. Nobody knows. I
Yeah,
think,
yeah.
yeah, so we just have to wait and see. The closing arguments from the defense and the follow up from the prosecution. I mean, do any big surprises ever pop up in those, or are they just a formality?
No, you can't have, the system here isn't designed for surprises, really. They should be addressing, I think one of the key things they'll be doing will be addressing any holes they feel the prosecution may have poked with their cross-examining, right? Or things they think were misstated or misrepresented or what have you.
Gotcha.
But also, part of the difficulty is we heard no real witness testimony addressing the second superseding indictment, which you and I haven't discussed, but basically that conspiracy charge was amended effectively at the last minute. Within like a week or two, it was a second superseding indictment, so that it's not just the conspiracy with Julian Assange, alleged conspiracy of Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning that we discussed, but things relating to hacking groups, saying that he's conspired with Anonymous or LulzSec or various hacking groups. And he's collaborated with them. And I think part of the issue is they were concerned that the key conspiracy charge, which is how they're probably claiming jurisdiction, right? Because why should espionage laws in the United States apply outside the United States? So there's the conspiracy charge to say, okay, well, you conspired with a U.S. citizen, so that's what gives us jurisdiction. But that wouldn't explain why he should then be subjected to all the Espionage Act charges. That would just explain why he should be charged with conspiracy and face up to 5 years in prison if convicted. But they don't want that, right? They want much more than that. Because holes were poked into it, I think, in last February, when they had already argued this is abusive process because the U.S. government already knows that Chelsea Manning had access to all the documents she needed. She didn't need access to a password. And the only thing that was being discussed was cracking a password hash so she could basically gain access to music videos and things like that. So this is a complete joke, they're saying. So I think that's why they just threw in this bunch of extra crap at the last minute for a new charge. There was a new indictment and saying, oh, conspiracy, basically to try to muddy the waters so that the judge says this is a matter for trial in the United States. We're not having a trial. We're having an extradition hearing just to determine if Julian Assange should be extradited to face trial in the United States. And the more complicated it seems, the more you could say, hey, this is not for you to decide. This is for a judge and a jury in the United States to decide. And that's something the prosecution kept pushing. So, but I do think that there is enough there now that if the judge is movable, and I had some people telling me that, on the legal team, they did think that the judge was movable, but that it would take a lot. I can't imagine what could be presented to this judge if she's not convinced that he falls under one of the exceptions, abuse of process, risk of suicide, all the various things that we've mentioned, and more things that we haven't even mentioned that are reasons not to extradite: freedom of speech, violation of freedom of the press, political prosecution, etc., etc. If quite frankly she hasn't heard enough now, then I can't imagine anything else that could have been presented. Even though the defense haven't had the opportunity to properly address the second superseding indictment, which they will have to in written submissions. I think that's the only way, because
they can't just leave it laying there, right? Things, yeah.
No, they have to address it, however much, to whatever extent. I mean, don't get me wrong. There will be things that witnesses will have said that they can point to,
okay,
to address it, but it'll be limited because no witness that I saw explicitly addressed it.
Gotcha. Yeah, that is kind of confusing, but they've been doing this for a long time. Presumably they know what they're doing. So, all right. Well, I don't want to take any more of your time, and I really, really appreciate your firsthand experience here of what happened. and all of the other analysis that you are kind of uniquely able to throw in there. I do appreciate that. Please tell everybody how to find you, how to support your work.
So I publish with Sputnik as well as with the Canary and a few other outlets. I have my own website called blog called theinterregnum.net. Well, I haven't been publishing there as much. And people can find my work via my Twitter handle at Elmaazi, where they can see the links, on the profile, which will link to the articles I write and also tweet out. Whenever I write an article, publish an article, I'll always tweet it out.
Great. Okay. Thanks again for all of your hard work here, and going forward, hope to talk to you again about it.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. Special thanks to Mohamed Elmaazi. Follow him on Twitter at Elmaazi, MELMAAZI, and visit his blog, The Interregnum. This podcast is independent media, so listener support is important. Patreon.com/AroundTheEmpire, PayPal.me/AroundTheEmpirePod. Find the podcast on any mobile podcast app, on the website AroundTheEmpire.com, on Patreon, or on YouTube. And if you're listening on YouTube, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Follow on Twitter at AroundTheEmpire, and we'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.